The snow began falling on the 23rd of December, just as the afternoon light started to fade into that peculiar blue-gray that only winter evenings know. Each flake drifted down slowly, almost reluctantly, as if savoring its brief journey from sky to earth. I stood at the kitchen window, my breath fogging the cold glass, watching the world transform into something softer, quieter, more forgiving. The warmth from the oven behind me carried the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar, wrapping around me like an invisible blanket, and for a moment I felt suspended between two worlds, the busy present and something else, something just beyond reach, like a word on the tip of my tongue. My daughter Emma called from the living room, asking if the cookies were ready yet. Her voice had that particular pitch of childhood impatience mixed with excitement, the kind that makes you smile even when you are tired. I told her 5 more minutes, maybe 10, and heard her dramatic sigh, followed by the sound of her flopping onto the couch. She was 9 years old, the same age I had been when something happened, something I could not quite remember, but could almost feel, like the phantom warmth of a hand that had once held mine. The kitchen timer ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt both too fast and too slow. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent, covering the bare branches of the oak tree in our front yard, the same tree that had been there when I was a child, when this house belonged to my grandmother. We had moved back here 3 years ago, after Gran passed away, and sometimes I would catch myself pausing in doorways or at the top of the stairs, feeling like I was waiting for something, listening for something, though I never knew what. I pulled the cookies from the oven, the heat rushing out to meet my face, and set the tray on the cooling rack. The gingerbread men looked perfect, their edges just barely darkened, their surfaces smooth and inviting. Emma appeared in the doorway almost instantly, as if she'd been hovering just out of sight, waiting for this exact moment. Her eyes went wide, and she breathed in deeply, theatrically making me laugh. "Can I decorate them now?" she asked, already reaching for the bowl of white icing I had prepared earlier. I told her to wait just a minute. They needed to cool, and she nodded but did not move away, standing there with her hands clasped together like someone making a wish. The kitchen light caught the red and green of her Christmas sweater, a hand-me-down from her cousin that was slightly too big, the sleeves hanging past her wrists. She pushed them up absently, her attention fixed on the cookies. While we waited, I made us both hot chocolate, the real kind, with cocoa powder and milk heated on the stove, not the instant packets that never tasted quite right. I added a little vanilla extract, just a few drops, the way my grandmother used to do. The smell rose up with the steam, rich and comforting, and suddenly I felt again that strange sense of something hovering just beyond memory, like a dream you know you had but cannot quite recall. Emma climbed onto the stool at the kitchen counter, swinging her legs back and forth, her heels tapping against the wooden rungs in an irregular rhythm. She asked me if I used to make cookies with Gran when I was little, and I said yes, every Christmas. We would spend a whole afternoon in this very kitchen, flour dusting every surface, the radio playing carols, the windows steaming up from the oven heat. She wanted to know what Gran was like, and I tried to find the right words. Tried to capture the essence of a woman who had been both gentle and fierce, who could make you feel completely safe and completely seen at the same time. Gran had silver hair that she wore in a bun, I told Emma, and she always smelled like lavender and vanilla, and she had this way of listening to you that made you feel like whatever you were saying was the most important thing in the world. Emma nodded thoughtfully, tracing patterns on the counter with her finger, and asked if Gran would have liked her. The question caught in my chest, unexpected and tender, and I had to swallow before I could answer. She would have loved you, I said, and it was the truest thing I had said all day. The cookies had cooled enough, so I set out the icing and the little containers of colored sugar and silver balls and red hots for decorating. Emma dove in with the focus and intensity that children bring to creative projects, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on giving each gingerbread man a unique personality. She narrated as she worked, telling me elaborate stories about each cookie, where they lived, what they liked to do, who their friends were. I decorated alongside her, more slowly, letting my hands work while my mind drifted. The snow outside was falling heavier now, the flakes smaller and more numerous, creating a white curtain that made the world beyond our yard disappear. The street lights had come on, their glow diffused and softened by the snow, and I could see our reflections in the dark window, Emma and me side by side at the counter, the warm kitchen light making us look like figures in a painting, something timeless and separate from the ordinary flow of days. Emma asked if we could put up the outdoor lights tomorrow on Christmas Eve, and I said yes if the snow stopped. She wanted to know if we could make snow angels and build a snowman, and maybe go sledding if there was enough accumulation. Her excitement was contagious, pulling me out of my strange, drifting mood, anchoring me back in the present moment. I found myself making plans, suggesting we could invite the neighbors over for hot chocolate after we finished the lights, maybe sing some carols, make it a real event. But even as I talked and planned, part of me remained elsewhere, caught in that strange in-between feeling, that sense of something forgotten trying to surface. I kept glancing at the window, at the snow, at the way the evening had settled around us like a hell breath. Emma finished her last cookie and held it up for my approval, a gingerbread man with a lopsided smile and mismatched buttons. And I told her it was perfect, absolutely perfect. We cleaned up together, washing bowls and wiping counters, and then Emma wanted to watch a Christmas movie. So we settled on the couch with a blanket and the plate of cookies between us. She chose the old animated one about the reindeer, the one I had watched countless times as a child, and as a familiar opening music played, I felt myself relaxing into the cushions, into the warmth of the house, into the simple pleasure of being here with my daughter on a snowy December evening. But I could not quite settle. Something kept pulling at my attention, a feeling like I had forgotten to do something important, or like someone had called my name from another room. I tried to focus on the movie, on Emma's running commentary, on the taste of the gingerbread and the chocolate, but my mind kept wandering back to that window, to the snow, to the particular quality of the light and the air and the moment. When the movie ended, Emma was yawning, her head heavy against my shoulder. I suggested bed, and she protested half-heartedly, but allowed herself to be led upstairs. We went to the bedtime routine, teeth brushing in pajamas, and the reading of 2 chapters from a book we were working through, a story about a girl who discovered a magical world in her grandmother's attic. Emma's eyes were drooping by the end of the 2nd chapter, and I kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp, leaving only the small nightlight glowing in the corner. Downstairs, the house felt different in the quiet. I moved through the rooms, turning off lights, checking locks, performing the small rituals of closing up for the night. But instead of heading to bed myself, I found myself drawn back to the kitchen, to that window where I had stood earlier. The snow had not stopped. If anything, it was falling even harder now, and the world outside had become completely white, completely transformed. I stood there in the dark kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I had made, without really thinking about it, and let my eyes unfocus, let my mind drift. The warmth of the mug seeped into my palms. The steam rose up, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey, and slowly, like something emerging from fog, a memory began to take shape. I was 9 years old. It was Christmas Eve. Snow was falling, just like tonight, heavy and transforming. I was staying at Gran's house, this house, and my parents were supposed to arrive in the morning. I was in the kitchen with Gran, and we had just finished decorating cookies, and she was making hot chocolate, the real kind, with vanilla extract, just a few drops. The radio was playing carols, and the windows were fogged with steam, and everything felt warm and safe and perfect. But then Gran had done something strange. She had turned off the kitchen light and led me to the window, and we had stood there together in the darkness, looking out at the snow. She had not said anything at first, just held my hand and watched, and I remember feeling confused, wondering what we were looking for, what we were supposed to see. The snow fell, and the world outside grew quieter and whiter, and still we stood there waiting. And then Gran had spoken, her voice soft and almost dreamy, and she had told me about Christmas magic. Not the Santa Claus kind of magic, though she believed in that too, but a different kind, quieter and deeper. She said that on certain Christmas Eves, when the snow fell just right and the world grew still enough, you could feel the presence of everyone who had ever loved you, everyone who had ever stood in that exact spot and felt that exact feeling of peace and anticipation and wonder. She said it was like all the Christmases that had ever been and all the Christmases yet to come existed in the same moment. And if you were very quiet and very open, you could sense them all at once. I had not understood. Not really, not at 9 years old. But I had felt something, standing there with her hand in mine, watching the snow fall. I had felt the bigness of the moment, the way it seemed to expand beyond the boundaries of that kitchen, that night, that single point in time. And then Gran had squeezed my hand and turned the light back on, and we had finished our hot chocolate and gone to bed. And in the morning my parents had arrived and Christmas had unfolded in all its noisy, joyful chaos. And I had forgotten all about that quiet moment at the window. Until now, until tonight, standing in the same spot, watching the same kind of snow fall, feeling the same quality of stillness in the air. The memory came back complete and vivid. And with it came a rush of emotion, so strong I had to set down my tea mug. I had to press my hand against the counter to steady myself. I could feel Gran's presence so clearly it was almost like she was standing beside me again, her hand in mine, her voice soft in the darkness. I do not know how long I stood there, letting the memory wash over me, letting myself feel the full weight of missing her, of wishing she could have met Emma, of wanting to hear her voice one more time. The tears came quietly, unexpectedly, and I let them fall, let myself grieve and remember and feel grateful all at once. Outside, the snow continued its patient work of covering everything, making everything new. Eventually, I wiped my eyes and picked up my tea again, taking a sip even though it had gone lukewarm. I thought about what Gran had said about all the Christmases existing at once, and I tried to feel it, try to open myself to that sense of connection across time. And maybe it was just my imagination, maybe it was just the emotion of the moment, but I could almost sense them, all those other Christmas Eves, layered one on top of another like pages in a book. Gran as a young woman, standing at the same window with her own grandmother. Gran as a mother, watching the snow while her children slept upstairs. Gran as an old woman, alone in this house, but not lonely, connected to all those other versions of herself, all those other moments. And now me, standing here with my own daughter asleep upstairs, becoming part of that chain, that continuity. The thought was both humbling and comforting. I was not alone. I had never been alone. All those people who had loved me, who had stood in this kitchen and felt this feeling, they were still here in some way, still present in the walls and the floorboards and the very air I breathed. I heard a sound from upstairs, a small creak that might have been Emma turning over in bed, and it pulled me back to the present moment. I rinsed my mug and set it in the sink, then made my way through the dark house to the stairs. But before I went up, I paused and looked back at the kitchen, at the window where the snow was still falling, and I whispered thank you into the darkness. Not sure who I was thanking, maybe Gran, maybe the house itself, maybe just the universe for giving me this moment, this memory, this connection. Upstairs, I checked on Emma, who was deeply asleep, her face peaceful in the glow of the nightlight. I adjusted her blanket and stood there for a moment, watching her breathe, feeling that fierce protective love that parenthood brings. She looked so small and so perfect, and I found myself hoping that someday, years from now, she would stand at that kitchen window on a snowy Christmas Eve and remember this time, remember making cookies with me, remember the warmth and the safety and the love, and feel connected to all of it, to all of us, across whatever distance time might create. I went in my own room and got ready for bed, but sleep felt far away. I lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me, to the muffled silence that snow brings, and I let my mind wander back through Christmases past. I remember being very small, maybe 4 or 5, and believing with absolute certainty that I could hear reindeer on the roof. I remember being a teenager, too cool to admit I still loved Christmas, but secretly thrilled by every tradition, every ritual. I remember my first Christmas with Emma, when she was just a few months old and slept through most of it, and how I had held her and cried with the overwhelming responsibility and joy of it all. Each memory was distinct and vivid, but they also blurred together, creating a kind of tapestry, a pattern that only became visible when you stepped back and looked at the whole thing. And at the center of so many of those memories was Gran, her steady presence, her quiet wisdom, her ability to make ordinary moments feel sacred. She had given me so much. I realized not just material things, but ways of seeing, ways of being, ways of finding meaning in the small and everyday. The next morning, Christmas Eve day, I woke to find that the snow had finally stopped, leaving behind a world transformed. Everything was white and pristine, the sun reflecting off the snow, so brightly it almost hurt to look at. Emma was already awake, her face pressed against her bedroom window, and when she heard me in the hallway, she came running out, talking so fast I could barely understand her. Something about snow angels and sledding. And could we please go outside right now? Immediately, this very second. We bundled up in layers, coats and scarves and mittens and boots, and stepped out into the cold. The air was sharp and clean, stinging my lungs in a way that felt invigorating rather than painful. Emma immediately threw herself backward into the snow, moving her arms and legs to create an angel, laughing with pure delight. I joined her, feeling slightly ridiculous but not caring, and we lay there side by side, looking up at the impossibly blue sky, our breath creating small clouds that dissipated almost instantly. The cold seeped through my coat, through my jeans, but I did not move. I wanted to stay in this moment, to hold on to it, to remember exactly how it felt. Emma was talking about her angel, about how it was going to be the best angel ever made, and I was agreeing, encouraging her, but part of me was also somewhere else, thinking about Gran, about that moment at the window, about the way the past and present seemed to be speaking to each other across the years. We spent the morning outside, building a snowman that ended up lopsided but charming, with a carrot nose and button eyes and one of my old scarves wrapped around its neck. Emma insisted on making a whole snow family, so we built a smaller snowman beside the first, and then an even smaller one, and she declared them to be a mother and father and child, just like us except we were missing a father. And I felt that familiar pang of sadness mixed with acceptance that came whenever she mentioned her dad, who had left when she was 2 and never looked back. But the moment passed quickly, as moments do with children, and Emma was already moving on to the next thing. Wanted to make a snow fort, wanted to have a snowball fight, wanted to taste the snow even though I told her it was not a good idea. We stayed out until our fingers were numb and our cheeks were red and our stomachs were growling with hunger, and then we trudged back inside, leaving a trail of melting snow and discarded winter gear in our wake. I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food that tasted even better after being out in the cold. We ate at the kitchen table, still in our thermal layers, warming up slowly. Emma chattered about everything we had done and everything we were going to do, and I listened and responded and felt grateful for her energy, her enthusiasm, her ability to be completely present in each moment. She did not carry the weight of memory and loss that I did. For her, this was just a wonderful snowy Christmas Eve, uncomplicated and joyful, and I was glad of that, glad she could experience it purely. After lunch, we tackled the outdoor lights. I had been putting it off, finding excuses, but Emma's excitement was impossible to resist. We dragged the boxes out from the garage, untangling strings of lights that had somehow become impossibly knotted despite being carefully stored. Emma helped as much as a 9-year-old could, which is to say she was more enthusiastic than effective, but I appreciated her company, her running commentary, her insistence that we needed to put lights absolutely everywhere. It took us most of the afternoon, but eventually the house was outlined in warm white lights, with a lit wreath on the door and luminarias lining the walkway. We stood at the end of the driveway as the sun began to set, admiring our work, and Emma slipped her mittened hand into mine and said it was the most beautiful house on the whole street, maybe in the whole world. I squeezed her hand and agreed, and meant it, not because the lights were particularly special, but because of what they represented, the effort and the care and the desire to create something beautiful, something welcoming, something that said this is a place where love lives. As darkness fell, neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the lights and the promise of community. I had put the word out earlier in the week about hot chocolate and caroling. Not sure if anyone would actually come, but they did, bundled in coats and scarves, bringing cookies and candy canes and good cheer. Someone had a guitar, and someone else had printed out song sheets, and before long we were standing in a loose circle in our front yard, singing Silent Night and Jingle Bells, and O Come All Ye Faithful, our voices rising into the cold night air. Emma was in her element, singing loudly and slightly off-key, her face glowing with happiness. I sang too, feeling self-conscious at first, but then letting go, letting myself be part of this moment, this gathering, this simple expression of joy and connection. The hot chocolate I had made in big thermoses was passed around, and people complimented the cookies Emma and I had made, and someone told a funny story about a Christmas disaster from years past, and everyone laughed, and it felt like exactly what Christmas Eve should feel like. But even in the midst of the celebration, I found my attention drifting back to that kitchen window, to the memory of Gran, to the feeling of connection across time. I looked at the house, at the lights we had hung, at the windows glowing warm against the darkness, and I thought about all the people who had lived here, all the Christmases that had been celebrated within these walls. Gran had been right. They were all still here. Somehow, all those moments, all those people, all that love. You just had to be quiet enough, open enough, to feel it. The caroling wound down eventually, as people began to drift back to their own homes, their own traditions, their own Christmas Eve rituals. Emma and I waved goodbye to the last of them, then gathered up the empty thermoses and stray cups and headed inside. The house felt especially warm after being out in the cold, and the smell of pine from our Christmas tree mixed with the lingering scent of hot chocolate and cookies, creating an atmosphere that was almost intoxicating in its coziness. Emma wanted to open one present, a tradition in our family, and she spent a long time deliberating, picking up different packages, shaking them gently, trying to guess what was inside. Finally, she chose a medium-sized box wrapped in silver paper and tore into it with a gleeful abandon that only children can muster. Inside was a set of art supplies, fancy ones, with oil pastels and watercolors and thick paper made specifically for painting. Her eyes went wide, and she hugged the box to her chest and thanked me about 17 times in rapid succession. She wanted to try them out immediately, so we spread newspaper on the kitchen table, and she set to work, creating a painting of our house in the snow, with the lights and the snowman family, and even the neighbors caroling in the yard. I sat with her, watching her work, marveling at her concentration, her confidence, her willingness to just create without worrying about whether it was good or right or perfect. She painted with bold strokes, mixing colors fearlessly, narrating her process as she went, and I felt that familiar surge of love and pride that parenthood brings, that sense of being witness to something miraculous and ordinary all at once. When she finished, we hung the painting on the refrigerator with magnets, and she stood back to admire it, clearly pleased with herself. Then she announced she was hungry again, which did not surprise me given that she was 9 and seemed to be hungry approximately every 45 minutes. I made us dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta with butter and Parmesan, and a side of steamed broccoli that Emma picked half-heartedly. We ate in comfortable silence, both of us tired from the long day, both of us content. After dinner, we had our traditional Christmas Eve movie night. Emma chose a different film this time, a newer one about a girl who saves Christmas by believing in magic, and we settled on the couch with blankets and the last of the cookies. The movie was sweet and predictable, but Emma was completely absorbed, gasping at the dramatic moments, laughing at the funny parts, wiping away tears at the emotional climax. I watched her as much as I watched the screen, loving her openness, her willingness to feel everything fully, her lack of cynicism or guardedness. When the movie ended, it was late, well past Emma's usual bedtime, but I let her stay up a little longer. We turned off the television and just sat in the glow of the Christmas tree lights, not talking, just being together. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling, and outside the world was still and white and peaceful. Emma leaned against me, her weight warm and solid, and I wrapped my arm around her and held her close. She asked me, in a sleepy voice, if I thought Gran was watching us from heaven. The question caught me off guard, and I had to think about how to answer. I did not know what I believed about heaven, about afterlife, about any of it, but I thought about what Gran had told me, about all the Christmases existing at once, about the presence of everyone who had ever loved you, and I told Emma that yes, in a way, I thought Gran was with us, not watching from some distant place. But here, in this house, in these traditions, in the love that connected us across time and distance and even death, Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, and she nodded against my shoulder, her eyes already closing. I let her doze for a few minutes, then gently roused her and guided her upstairs. We went through the bedtime routine quickly, both of us too tired for the usual negotiations about one more chapter or 5 more minutes. I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, and she mumbled something about Santa and cookies, and then she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. I went back downstairs and set out the cookies and milk that Emma had insisted we leave for Santa, along with a carrot for the reindeer. I ate the cookies and drank the milk, leaving strategic crumbs in a half-empty glass, then arranged the presents under the tree, the ones I had been hiding in the back of my closet for weeks. It was late, nearly midnight, and I should have been exhausted, but I felt strangely awake, energized by something I could not quite name. I found myself drawn, once again, to the kitchen window. The outdoor lights were still on, casting a soft glow on the snow, and the street was empty and silent. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness, just as Gran and I had done all those years ago, and I let myself be still, let myself be open, let myself feel whatever was there to be felt. And there it was, that feeling Gran had described, that sense of all the Christmases layered one on top of another, all the love and joy and hope and longing existing simultaneously. I could feel Gran beside me, her hand in mine, even though I knew she was gone. I could feel my own childhood self, 9 years old and confused but trusting, standing in this exact spot. I could feel Emma upstairs, dreaming of Christmas morning, and I could feel all the future Christmases stretching out ahead of us, moments we had not yet lived but that already existed in potential, in possibility. The feeling was overwhelming and comforting all at once. Too big to fully comprehend, but somehow exactly right. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. I lost track. Time felt different in that space, elastic and fluid, and I let myself exist in it without trying to understand or explain or capture it. I just let it be, let myself be, let the moment unfold in its own way. Eventually, I became aware of the cold seeping through the window, of my feet getting tired from standing, of the ordinary physical world reasserting itself. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, then turned the kitchen light back on. The spell, if that was what it was, broke gently, and I was just myself again, standing in my kitchen on Christmas Eve, tired and grateful and full of love. I made my way upstairs, checking once more on Emma, who had not moved, then got ready for bed myself. As I lay in the darkness, waiting for sleep to come, I thought about what I would tell Emma someday, when she was older, when she could understand. I would tell her about Gran, about that snowy Christmas Eve when I was 9, about the magic of connection across time. I would tell her that love does not end, that the people who matter to us never really leave, that we carry them with us in everything we do, every tradition we keep, every moment we choose to be present and open and grateful. And maybe, I thought as sleep began to pull me under, maybe someday Emma would stand at that kitchen window on a snowy Christmas Eve with her own child, and she would remember this time, remember me, remember Gran, and she would feel that same sense of connection, that same magic. The thought made me smile in the darkness, made me feel part of something larger than myself, something that would continue long after I was gone. Christmas morning arrived with Emma bouncing on my bed, her excitement so palpable it was almost a physical force. I groaned and pretended to still be asleep, which made her laugh and bounce harder, and finally I gave in and got up, letting her drag me downstairs to see what Santa had brought. Her face, when she saw the presents, was worth every bit of effort, every late night of shopping and wrapping and hiding. She tore into them with abandon, exclaiming over each one, and I sat on the couch with my coffee and watched, committing every moment to memory. We spent the morning in pajamas, playing with new toys, reading new books, eating cinnamon rolls I had made the day before and hidden in the back of the refrigerator. The house was warm and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows and reflecting off the snow outside, and everything felt perfect in that imperfect, real-life way that is actually better than any idealized version could be. Around noon, we got dressed and drove to my brother's house for Christmas dinner with the extended family. It was loud and chaotic, with cousins running everywhere and adults talking over each other, and the constant background noise of a football game on television. Emma disappeared into the pack of children, and I found myself in the kitchen with my sister-in-law, helping with last-minute preparations, gossiping about family members, laughing at old stories and inside jokes. Dinner was a production, with too much food and too many people trying to help and not enough space at the table, but we made it work. squeezing in and passing dishes and filling plates until they were overflowing. The food was delicious. Traditional Christmas fare, turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole and cranberry sauce. And we ate until we were uncomfortably full, and then somehow found room for pie. After dinner, the adults collapsed in the living room while the kids went back to playing, and someone suggested we go around and share our favorite Christmas memory. It was the kind of thing that could have been corny, but somehow was not, and people told stories that were funny and touching, and sometimes both at once. When it was my turn, I found myself telling them about Gran, about that Christmas Eve when I was 9, about standing at the kitchen window, and learning about the magic of connection across time. My brother remembered that Christmas, remembered me coming home the next day and trying to explain what Gran had told me, and how he had not understood what I was talking about. My mother got teary and said that Gran had been special, that she had a way of seeing the world that was both practical and mystical, and that we were all lucky to have known her. And my aunt, Gran's daughter, said that Gran used to do the same thing with her. Stand at that window on snowy Christmas Eves and talk about the presence of love across time, and that it was a tradition Gran had learned from her own grandmother, passed down through generations. The revelation stunned me. I had thought it was just something Gran had made up, just a story she had told to entertain a 9-year-old on a snowy night. But it was more than that. It was a tradition, a ritual, a way of understanding and experiencing Christmas that had been passed down to my family for generations. And now I was part of that chain, and someday Emma would be too, and the thought filled me with a sense of belonging and purpose that I had not known I was missing. The conversation moved on to other topics, other memories, but I sat there quietly, processing what I had learned, feeling the weight and beauty of it. Emma came over and climbed into my lap, tired from playing, and I wrapped my arms around her and held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against mine. She asked if we could go home soon, and I said yes, just a little while longer, and she nodded and settled against me, content to just be held. We drove home as the sun was setting, the sky turning shades of pink and orange and purple that seemed almost unreal in their beauty. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day, and I drove slowly, carefully, not wanting to wake her, not wanting to break the peaceful spell of the moment. The streets were quiet, most people home with their families, and the Christmas lights on the houses we passed glowed warm and welcoming in the gathering darkness. When we got home, I carried Emma inside and up to her bed, managing to get her into pajamas without fully waking her. She mumbled something about it being the best Christmas ever, and I kissed her forehead and told her I loved her, and she was asleep again before I even left the room. I stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her sleep, feeling that overwhelming love that sometimes feels almost like pain in its intensity. Downstairs, I cleaned up the wrapping paper and boxes in the morning, put away the toys and books, restored some semblance of order to the chaos. Then I made myself a cup of tea and, inevitably, found myself drawn back to the kitchen window. The outdoor lights were still on, and the snow from a few days ago was still pristine and white, unmarked except for the tracks Emma and I had made building our snowman family. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the familiar darkness, looking out at the night, and I felt again that sense of connection, that presence of all the people who had stood in the spot before me, all the women in my family who had performed the same ritual, who had opened themselves to the same feeling. Gran was there, and her mother and her grandmother, and all the others stretching back through time. And I was there, and Emma would be there someday, and it was all connected, all part of the same continuous thread of love and memory and tradition. I thought about what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself, to be a link in a chain that extended both backward and forward through time. It was humbling and empowering all at once, a reminder that we are never truly alone, that we are always connected to those who came before and those who will come after. The traditions we keep, the stories we tell, the love we give, they all matter, they all continue. They all become part of the larger tapestry of family and memory and meaning. Standing there in the darkness, I made a promise to myself and to Gran, and to all those other women who had stood in this spot. I promised to keep this tradition alive, to pass it on to Emma when she was old enough to understand, to make sure she knew about the magic of connection across time. I promised to be present, to be open, to pay attention to the moments that matter, the small rituals and quiet connections that give life its depth and meaning. And I promise to remember, always, that love does not end, that the people who shape us never really leave, that we carry them with us in everything we do. Gran had given me so much, not just material things or even memories, but a way of seeing the world, a way of understanding my place in it, a way of finding magic in the ordinary and meaning in the everyday. And now it was my responsibility to pass that on, to be for Emma what Gran had been for me, a steady presence, a source of wisdom, a keeper of traditions. The feeling began to fade, as it always did, and I became aware again of the cold from the window, the weight of my body, the ordinary physical world. But this time, instead of feeling sad about the ending of the moment, I felt grateful for having experienced it all. I turned the light back on and finished my tea, then made my way upstairs to bed, feeling tired but content, peaceful in a way I had not felt in a long time. As I lay in the darkness waiting for sleep, I thought about the year ahead, about all the ordinary days and small moments that would make up our lives. I thought about Emma growing and changing, about the challenges we would face and the joys we would experience, about the slow, steady work of building a life and raising a child and being part of family. It would not always be easy. I knew that. There would be hard days and difficult moments and times when I felt overwhelmed or inadequate or alone. But I also knew, with a certainty that felt like grace, that I would never truly be alone. I had Gran with me, and all those other women who had stood at that window, and I had Emma, and I had the traditions and memories and love that connected us all. And that would be enough. It would have to be enough. It was more than enough. The days after Christmas passed in a pleasant blur of relaxation and recovery. Emma played with her new toys. I caught up on reading and rest, and we both enjoyed the freedom of not having anywhere to be or anything we had to do. The snow began to melt, slowly at first, and then more quickly as the temperature rose, and the world transformed again, from white and pristine back to brown and ordinary. On New Year's Eve, Emma and I had our own quiet celebration, just the two of us. We made pizza from scratch, letting Emma help with the dough and the toppings, and we watched movies and played games and stayed up until midnight to watch the ball drop on television. When the clock struck 12, we hugged and made wishes for New Year, and I felt hopeful in a way I had not felt in a long time. Like maybe this year will be different, better, fuller. January arrived with its usual cold and darkness, and we settled back into our routines, school and work, and the ordinary rhythm of daily life. But something had shifted in me, some fundamental way of seeing and being that made everything feel different, more meaningful, more connected. I found myself paying more attention to the small moments, the everyday rituals, the ways that Emma and I were creating our own traditions and memories. I started writing things down, keeping a journal of the moments I wanted to remember, the things Emma said and did that made me laugh or think or feel grateful. I took more pictures, not just the pose ones, but the candid shots of ordinary life. Emma doing homework at the kitchen table, Emma reading on the couch, Emma helping me cook dinner. I wanted to capture it all, to hold on to it, to create a record that she could look back on someday and know how much she was loved, how much these moments mattered. And every so often, on quiet evenings when Emma was asleep and the house was still, I would find myself at that kitchen window, looking out at whatever weather the night had brought, and I would let myself feel that connection, that presence of all the people who had loved me and all the moments that had shaped me. It became a kind of meditation, a way of grounding myself, of remembering what mattered, of staying connected to something larger than my own small life and worries. Winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, and the year unfolded in its predictable yet surprising way. Emma finished 4th grade and started 5th, growing taller and more independent, her interests shifting and evolving in ways that both delighted and occasionally worried me. We had good days and hard days, moments of perfect connection, and moments of frustration and misunderstanding, all the normal ups and downs of life with a child. But through it all, I held on to what I had learned at Christmas Eve, about the importance of presence and connection, about the way love transcends time and distance, about the power of tradition and memory to give our lives meaning and depth. I tried to be for Emma what Gran had been for me, not perfect but present, not all-knowing but willing to listen, not without flaws but full of love. And as the months passed and another Christmas approached, I found myself looking forward to it in a way I had not in years. Not just for the presents and the food and the celebration, but for the opportunity to stand at that window again, to feel that connection again, to be part of that long chain of women who had performed this ritual and passed it on. And this year, I thought maybe Emma was old enough to join me, to begin learning about this tradition, to start becoming part of it herself. The thought filled me with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What if she did not understand? What if she thought it was silly or boring? What if the magic that had been so real for me did not translate to her? But I pushed those worries aside, trusting that if it was meant to be, it would be, and that even if Emma did not fully grasp it now, the seed would be planted, and someday, maybe years from now, it would bloom into understanding. December arrived with its usual rush and chaos, the shopping and wrapping and planning and preparing. But this year I tried to move through it more mindfully, more intentionally, savoring the process rather than just enduring it. Emma and I made cookies again, the same gingerbread recipe Gran had used, and as we worked side by side in the kitchen, I told her stories about Gran, about the Christmases we had shared, about the traditions she had passed down to me. Emma listened with interest, asking questions, wanted to know more, and I felt a surge of hope that maybe she was ready. Maybe this was the right time. On Christmas Eve, after we had hung the lights and hosted the neighbors and watched our movie and gone through all our usual traditions, I asked Emma if she wanted to try something special, something Gran had taught me when I was her age. She said yes immediately, curious and eager, and I led her to the kitchen window. I turned off the light, and we stood there together in the darkness, looking out at the snow that had begun falling earlier in the evening. I held her hand, just as Gran had held mine all those years ago, and I told her about the magic of Christmas Eve, about how all the Christmases that had ever been and all the Christmases yet to come existed in the same moment, about how you could feel the presence of everyone who had ever loved you if you were quiet enough and open enough. Emma was silent for a long moment, and I worried that I had lost her, that it was too abstract or too strange. But then she squeezed my hand and said in a soft voice that she could feel it. She could feel Gran there with us, and all the other people too, and it was like they were all holding hands in a long line stretching back through time. And I felt tears spring to my eyes, because she understood, she got it, the magic was real for her too. We stood there together for a long time, mother and daughter, connected to each other, and all the women who would come before us, and all the women who would come after. The snow fell softly outside, covering the world in white, and inside the house was warm and quiet and full of love. And I knew with absolute certainty that this moment would stay with Emma the way that moment with Gran had stayed with me, that it would become part of her, shaping how she saw the world and her place in it. Eventually, we turned the light back on and finished getting ready for bed. But something had changed, some invisible bond had been strengthened, some tradition had been successfully passed on. Emma hugged me extra tight that night and whispered that she loved me and that she was glad we lived in Gran's house and that she could not wait to do this again next year. And I held her close and told her I loved her too, more than words could say, and that I was so proud of her, so grateful for her, so lucky to be her mother. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the journey I had been on from that first Christmas Eve when the memory had returned to me, through the year of learning and growing and understanding, to this moment of passing the tradition on to Emma. It had been a year of transformation, of learning to see my life not as a series of disconnected moments, but as part of a larger story, a longer arc, a deeper meaning. I thought about Gran, about how much I missed her and how grateful I was for everything she had given me. I thought about Emma, about the woman she would become, about the traditions she would keep and the ones she would create, about the ways she would carry this forward into her own life and eventually pass it on to her own children. And I thought about myself, about my place in this chain, about the responsibility and privilege of being a link between past and future. The years that followed brought their share of changes and challenges, as years always do. Emma grew from a child into a teenager, with all the complexity and intensity that entails. There were times when we struggled to understand each other, when the easy closeness of her childhood gave way to the necessary separation of adolescence. But through it all, we had that tradition, that moment at the kitchen window on Christmas Eve, and became an anchor for us, a reminder of our connection even when everything else felt uncertain. Every year, without fail, we would stand there together in the darkness, holding hands, feeling the presence of all those who had come before and all those yet to come. Sometimes Emma would be chatty, telling me about her feelings and thoughts and experiences. Sometimes she would be quiet, lost in her own internal world. But she was always there, always willing to participate in this ritual, and I knew it meant something to her, even if she could not always articulate what. When Emma was 16, she asked me to tell her everything I knew about the tradition, about where it came from and who had practiced it and what it meant. We sat at the kitchen table with hot chocolate, and I told her everything my aunt had told me, about how it had been passed down through generations of women in our family, about how each one had added her own understanding and interpretation to it, about how it was both ancient and ever new. Emma listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and then she said something that surprised me. She said she wanted to write it down, to create a record of the tradition so that it would not be lost, so that future generations would know where it came from and why it mattered. She said she had been thinking about it a lot, about the importance of preserving family history and tradition, and that she wanted to make sure this particular tradition survived. I was moved by her thoughtfulness, her sense of responsibility to the past and the future, and I helped her as much as I could, sharing everything I remembered, everything I had learned, everything I had felt. She spent weeks working on it, interviewing other family members, researching the history of our family, creating a beautiful document that was part history, part memoir, part instruction manual for future generations. When she finished, she gave me a copy, and I read it with tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by her insight and eloquence, by the way she had captured not just the fact of the tradition, but its spirit, its meaning, its power. She had understood, truly understood, what Gran had been trying to teach us, about the way love transcends time, about the way we are all connected, about the way traditions give our lives depth and meaning and continuity. Emma graduated from high school and went off to college, and the house felt empty without her, too quiet, too still. I missed her terribly, missed her energy and her laughter and her presence, but I was also proud of her, proud of the young woman she had become, proud of the way she was stepping into her own life with courage and curiosity and grace. We talked on the phone regularly, and she came home for holidays and breaks, and slowly I adjusted to this new phase of life, this new way of being her mother. That first Christmas with Emma away at college was hard. I went through all the motions, the decorating and the baking and the shopping, but it felt hollow without her there to share it with. On Christmas Eve, I stood at the kitchen window alone, and for the first time in years, I could not feel the magic, could not sense the presence of all those other Christmases, all those other people. I just felt lonely and sad and acutely aware of how much had changed, how much I had lost. But then my phone rang, and it was Emma, called from her dorm room, and she asked if I was at the window. I said yes, and she said she was at her window too, looking out at the snow falling on her campus, and could we do the tradition together even though we were apart. And we stood there, connected by phone, each at our own window, and she talked about what she was feeling, about the presence of Gran and me and all the other women in our family, and about how, even though we were physically separated, we were still connected, still part of the same tradition, the same chain of love and memory. And just like that, the magic came back, stronger than ever, because I realized that the tradition was not about being in a specific place or following a specific script. It was about intention and connection and openness, about choosing to remember and honor and feel grateful for all the love that had shaped us. It did not matter that Emma was hundreds of miles away. She was still with me, still part of this, still carrying the tradition forward in her own way. We talked for a long time that night, sharing memories and feelings and hopes of the future, and when we finally hung up, I felt at peace, felt connected not just to the past, but to the present and the future as well. Emma was out in the world, living her own life, but she was still my daughter, still part of this family, still committed to these traditions that gave our lives meaning and continuity. The years continue to pass, as years do, bringing more changes and transitions. Emma graduated from college and started her career, moved to a new city, built a life of her own. She dated, had her heart broken, dated again, and eventually met someone who made her happy, who treated her well, who understood and appreciated who she was. They got engaged, and I helped plan a wedding, and I watched my daughter marry the person she loved. And I felt all the complicated emotions that such moments bring, joy and pride, and a little bit of sadness for passage of time, for the way children grow up and move on and create their own families. But even as Emma built her own life, she stayed connected to the tradition, to the family, to me. Every Christmas Eve, no matter where she was or what else was happening, she would call me, and we would stand at our respective windows and share that moment of connection and remembrance. And I knew that someday, when she had children of her own, she would pass the tradition on to them, would stand at a window with her daughter or son and tell them about Gran and about me and about all the women who had come before, and the chain would continue, unbroken. And then, one spring day when Emma had been married for 3 years, she called with news that made my heart soar. She was pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother. The joy I felt was almost overwhelming, mixed with 1,000 other emotions, excitement and nervousness, and a deep sense of the circle completing itself, of the pattern continuing, of life renewing itself in the way it always has and always will. Emma's pregnancy was healthy and uneventful, and I visited as often as I could, helping her prepare the nursery, going to doctor's appointments, just being there in whatever way she needed. We talked about parenting and about her fears and hopes, and I tried to offer wisdom without being overbearing, try to support without taking over, try to be for her what Gran had been for me, a steady presence, a source of love and encouragement. The baby, a girl, was born on a cold December morning just 2 weeks before Christmas. Emma named her Grace, after Gran, whose full name had been Grace Eleanor, and when I held my granddaughter for the first time, I felt the full weight and beauty of the continuity of life, of the way we are all connected across time, of the way love gets passed down from generation to generation, transforming but never diminishing. That Christmas was unlike any other, with a newborn in the family, with Emma exhausted and overwhelmed but radiantly happy, with all of us adjusting to this new reality, this new person who had entered our lives and changed everything. On Christmas Eve, Emma was too tired to do much, so I took care of most of the preparations, cooking and cleaning, and making sure everything was ready for the next day when the rest of the family would arrive. But when evening came, Emma asked if we could do the tradition, even though Grace was only 2 weeks old and would not understand any of it. I said, of course, and we bundled Grace up, and the 3 of us went to the window, 3 generations standing together in the darkness, looking out at the snow that had begun to fall. Emma held Grace, and I put my arm around Emma, and we stood there in silence, feeling the presence of all those who had come before, all those who had stood in the same spot and felt the same feeling. And I thought about Gran, about how much I wished she could have met Grace, could have held her great-great-granddaughter, could have seen the continuation of the tradition she had started, or rather, had continued from those who came before her. But in a way, she was there, her presence woven into the very fabric of the moment, into the tradition itself, into the love that connected all of us across time and distance and even death. Grace stirred in Emma's arms, making small baby noises, and Emma looked down at her with such love and wonder that it took my breath away. And I knew that someday, years from now, Emma would stand at a window with Grace, would tell her about the tradition, would pass on the wisdom and the magic and the sense of connection that had been passed down through so many generations. And Grace would stand at a window with her own daughter someday, and the chain would continue, unbroken, a living testament to the power of love and memory and tradition. The years that followed brought all the joys and challenges of watching a grandchild grow. I visited as often as I could, delighting in every milestone, every new word, every small achievement. Grace was a happy child, curious and affectionate, and she seemed to have inherited the family trait of being able to find magic in ordinary moments, of being present and open to wonder. When Grace was 5 years old, Emma and her husband made a decision that surprised and delighted me. They decided to move back to our hometown, back to the area where Emma had grown up, so that Grace could be closer to family, could grow up with the same sense of roots and belonging that Emma had had. They bought a house just a few streets away from Gran's old house, the house where I still lived, and suddenly my days were full again, full of impromptu visits and shared meals and the beautiful chaos of having a young child nearby. Grace loved coming to my house, loved exploring all the rooms and hearing stories about when her mother was little, about when I was little, about Gran and all the other people who had lived in this house over the years. She was particularly fascinated by the kitchen, by the big window that looked out over the yard, and she would often stand there, looking out, asking questions about what I was looking at, what I was thinking about. I knew she was too young yet to understand the tradition, to grasp the concept of connection across time, but I also knew that the seeds were being planted, that she was absorbing the atmosphere, the sense of this place being special, being meaningful, being connected to something larger than just the present moment. And I was patient, knowing that when the time was right, when she was old enough to understand, Emma would share the tradition with her, would bring her to this window on a Christmas Eve and open her to magic that had shaped so many of us. When Grace was 9 years old, the same age I had been when Gran first shared the tradition with me, the same age Emma had been when I shared it with her, I knew the time had come. Emma and I talked about it, planned it, decided that this Christmas Eve would be the one when Grace would be invited into the tradition, when she would become the next link in the chain. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect timing, with snow falling gently, with the world quiet and peaceful and full of anticipation. We had spent the day together, the three of us, baking cookies and decorating and watching movies, creating memories that Grace would carry with her for the rest of her life. And when evening came, after dinner and after the outdoor lights had been turned on, and after all the usual traditions had been observed, Emma told Grace that there was one more thing, something special, something that had been passed down to the family for generations. Grace's eyes went wide with interest, and she followed us to the kitchen, to that window where so many women in our family had stood before. Emma turned off the light, and the three of us stood there in the darkness, Emma in the middle holding Grace's hand on one side and mine on the other. 3 generations connected, 3 links in a chain that stretched back through time and forward into the future. Emma told Grace about the tradition, about how on certain Christmas Eves, when you were very quiet and very open, you could feel the presence of everyone who had ever loved you, everyone who had ever stood in that exact spot and felt that exact feeling of peace and wonder and connection. She told her about Gran, about me, about all the other women who had practiced this ritual, and about how now Grace was old enough to be part of it too, to add her own understanding and experience to the tradition. Grace was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel her concentrating, trying to understand, trying to feel what we were describing. And then she said, in a voice full of wonder, that she could feel them, all those people, like they were standing right there with us, like they were holding hands in a long line that went on forever. And she said she could feel Gran especially, even though she had never met her, could feel her love and her presence and her approval. Emma and I looked at each other over Grace's head, and I saw tears in Emma's eyes that matched the ones of my own. The tradition had been successfully passed on once again. The chain remained unbroken, and Grace was now part of something that would shape her understanding of herself and her place in the world for the rest of her life. We stood there together for a long time, longer than I had expected a 9-year-old to be able to stand still. But Grace seemed content, seemed to understand the importance of the moment, seemed to be absorbing it all in that deep way that children sometimes can. And when we finally turned the light back on and returned to the ordinary world, something had changed. Some invisible bond had been strengthened. Some tradition had been successfully transmitted to the next generation. That night, after Grace and Emma had gone home, I stood at the window alone one more time, and I felt a sense of completion, of satisfaction, of deep gratitude for the life I had lived and the people I had loved and the traditions I had been able to pass on. I thought about Gran, about how proud she would be, about how the simple act of standing at a window and opening yourself to connection had rippled out through time, affecting generation after generation, creating a legacy that was more valuable than any material inheritance could ever be. I thought about my own life, about all the twists and turns it had taken, all the joys and sorrows, all the moments of connection and moments of loneliness. I thought about the mistakes I had made and the things I had done right, about the ways I had succeeded as a mother and the ways I had fallen short. And I realized that none of it had been perfect, but all of it had been enough, because I had loved deeply and been loved in return, and I had passed on something of value to the next generation. The tradition was not just about standing at a window or feeling a certain feeling. It was about understanding that we are all connected, that love transcends time and space, that the people who shape us never really leave us, that we carry them with us in everything we do. It was about finding meaning in the ordinary, about creating rituals that anchor us, about building bridges between past and future. And it was about the simple but profound act of paying attention, of being present, of opening yourself to magic that exists in every moment if you're willing to see it. As I stood there in the darkness, looking out at the quiet street, at the houses with their Christmas lights glowing warm against the night, I felt at peace in a way I had not felt in years. I had done what I was supposed to do. I had received the gift Gran had given me, had treasured it and understood it and passed it on. The chain was unbroken. The tradition would continue. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky was beginning to clear, revealing stars that seemed impossibly bright and close. I stood there a while longer, just breathing, just being, just feeling grateful for this life, this family, this moment. And then I turned the light back on and went about the business of closing up the house for the night, performing the small rituals that marked the end of one day and the beginning of another. But before I went upstairs to bed, I paused in the kitchen doorway and looked back at that window one more time, and I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you. Thank you for this life. Thank you for this family. Thank you for this tradition. Thank you for the love that connects us all across time and distance and even death. Thank you to Gran, who started it all, or rather who continued it from those who came before her. Thank you to Emma, who understood and embraced it and passed it on. Thank you to Grace, who will carry it forward into the future. And thank you to all the women yet to come, all the daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters who will stand at windows on snowy Christmas Eves and feel the presence of all of us, all the love that came before them, all the connection that makes us who we are." The house was quiet around me, but it was not an empty quiet. It was full of presence, full of memory, full of love. Every room held stories. Every corner held moments. Every surface held the fingerprints of all the people who had lived here and loved here and created their lives here. And I was part of that now, woven into the fabric of this place, this family, this tradition. When I was gone, I would still be here, in the stories Emma told Grace, in the tradition they practiced together, in the love that would continue long after my physical presence had faded. The thought was comforting rather than sad. I had lived a good life, not a perfect one, but a real one, full of love and meaning and connection. I had been shaped by those who came before me, and I had shaped those who came after. I had received gifts and passed them on. I had been loved and had loved in return. And that was the point of it all, really, the whole purpose of this strange and beautiful journey we call life. To love and be loved. To connect and be connected. To receive and to give. To be part of something larger than ourselves. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling my age in my knees and my back, but not minding it, accepting it as part of the natural progression of things. I got ready for bed and slipped under the covers, and as I lay there in the darkness, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow would be Christmas, with all its noise and chaos and joy. Emma and Grace would come over, and we would open presents and eat too much and laugh and tell stories and create more memories to add to all the others. But tonight, this moment, was mine alone, a quiet space between the busy days, a chance to reflect and remember and feel grateful. I thought about that first Christmas Eve when the memory had returned to me, when I had stood at the kitchen window, and suddenly remembered Gran, and that moment we had shared when I was 9. I thought about how that memory had changed everything, had opened me to a deeper understanding of my life and my place in the larger story of my family. I thought about all the Christmas Eves that followed, each one adding another layer of meaning, another thread to the tapestry. I thought about the year Emma had joined me in the tradition, and the year we had done over the phone when she was away at college, and the year Grace was born and we had stood at the window with a 2-week-old baby in our arms. Each moment was distinct and precious, but they also blurred together into a larger pattern, a continuous thread of love and connection that ran through all of them. And I thought about the future, about all the Christmas Eves yet to come, the ones I would be part of and the ones I would not. I thought about Grace growing up and having children of her own, and those children growing up and having children, and the tradition continuing, evolving, adapting to new times and new circumstances, but maintaining its essential core, its fundamental message about love and connection, and the way we are all part of something larger than ourselves. The thought filled me with a sense of peace and purpose that was almost overwhelming. My life had mattered, not because I had done anything particularly remarkable or achieved anything particularly noteworthy, but because I had loved and been loved, because I had received a gift and passed it on, because I had been a link in a chain that connected past and future. And that was enough. That was everything. Sleep began to pull at me, that gentle, insistent tug that comes at the end of a long and full day. I let myself drift, let my mind wander through memories and dreams, let the boundaries between past and present and future blur and dissolve. And in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, I felt it one more time, that sense of connection, that presence of all the people who had loved me and all the people I had loved, all of us existing together in some dimension beyond time, all of us connected by the invisible but unbreakable threads of love and memory. Gran was there, young and old, and every age in between, her hand in mine, her voice soft in my ear, telling me that I had done well, that she was proud of me, that the tradition was safe in my hands, and in Emma's hands, and in Grace's hands. And I felt my parents, gone now for several years, their presence warm and comforting, their approval washing over me like a blessing. And I felt Emma and Grace, not just as they were now, but as they would be in the future, grown and changed, but still connected to me, still part of this chain of love. And I felt all the others, the women whose names I did not know, who had stood at windows on snowy Christmas Eves long before I was born, who had felt the same feeling and passed it on to their daughters and granddaughters. We were all connected, all part of the same story, all links in the same chain. And the chain would continue, long after I was gone, long after everyone I knew was gone, because love does not end, connection does not break, and the traditions we create and maintain become part of the fabric of the universe itself. With that thought, I slipped into sleep, into dreams that were full of light and warmth in the faces of everyone I had ever loved. And when I woke on Christmas morning to the sound of Emma and Grace arriving, their voices bright with excitement and joy, I felt rested and renewed, ready to embrace another day, another Christmas, another opportunity to love and be loved, to connect and be connected, to be part of this beautiful, complicated, miraculous thing we call family. The day unfolded in all its chaotic glory, with presents and laughter and too much food and the beautiful mess that comes with having a child in the house. Grace was everywhere at once, showing me her gifts, telling me stories, asking questions, her energy seemingly boundless. Emma moved through the day with the practiced ease of an experienced mother, managing Grace's excitement, while also trying to relax and enjoy the holiday herself. I watched them both with a heart, so full it felt like it might burst. This was what it was all about, these moments of ordinary joy, these simple pleasures of being together, of sharing food and laughter and love. The tradition at the window was important, meaningful, transformative even, but it was not separate from these everyday moments. It was woven into them, giving them depth and context, connecting them to all the other moments that had come before and all the moments yet to come. As the afternoon wore on and Grace began to tire, Emma suggested they should probably head home. Let Grace have some quiet time before she got completely overtired and melted down. I helped them gather their things, their new toys and leftover food, and the various items that had somehow migrated from their house to mine over the course of the day. Grace hugged me tight and told me it was the best Christmas ever, and I kissed the top of her head and told her I loved her more than all the stars in the sky. After they left, I cleaned up slowly, not in any hurry, savoring the quiet after the noise, the stillness after the activity. I put away dishes and folded blankets and picked up stray bits of wrapping paper, restoring order to the chaos. And as I worked, I found myself humming Christmas carols, feeling content and peaceful and deeply, profoundly grateful for this life I had been given, for the people I had been blessed to love, for the traditions that connected us all. That evening, as darkness fell and the Christmas lights came on up and down the street, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, looking out at the winter night. The snow from Christmas Eve was still on the ground, though it had begun to melt in places, revealing patches of brown grass underneath. The world was in that in-between state, not quite winter anymore, but not yet spring, holding the memory of what had been while anticipating what was to come. I thought about time, about how it moves in one direction, but also somehow circles back on itself, how the past is never really past, but continues to exist in memory and tradition, and the ways we are shaped by what came before. I thought about how I was simultaneously the child who had stood at the window with Gran, the mother who had stood at the window with Emma, and the grandmother who had stood at the window with both Emma and Grace. All those versions of myself existed at once, layered one on top of another, each one informing and enriching the others. And I thought about how this was true for everyone, how we all carry within us every age we have ever been, every experience we have ever had, every person we have ever loved. We are not fixed or static, but constantly evolving, constantly becoming, constantly adding new layers to the complex tapestry of who we are. And the traditions we keep, the rituals we practice, they help us make sense of that complexity, help us see the patterns and connections that give our lives meaning and coherence. The kitchen was warm and quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. I finished my dinner and washed my dishes, then made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the living room, where the Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights twinkling softly in the darkness. I sat on the couch and just looked at it, at the ornaments that held so many memories, each one representing a different year, a different moment, a different version of our family. There were ornaments from my childhood, fragile glass balls that Gran had hung on her tree and that I had inherited when she passed. There were ornaments Emma had made in school, construction paper and glitter and pipe cleaners, precious beyond measure despite their humble materials. There were ornaments I had bought to commemorate special occasions, Emma's first Christmas, her graduation, her wedding. And there were new ornaments, ones Grace had made or chosen, adding her own layer to the family history. Each ornament was a story, a memory, a moment frozen in time. And together they created a narrative, a visual representation of our family's journey through the years. Looking at them, I could trace the arc of our lives, see the patterns and connections, understand how each moment had led to the next, how everything was connected in ways both obvious and subtle. I sipped my tea and let my mind wander, not trying to direct my thoughts, but just letting them flow where they wanted to go. I thought about the future, about what would happen to all these ornaments when I was gone, about who would inherit them and whether they would understand their significance. I thought about Grace growing up and having her own tree someday, and whether she would want these old ornaments or prefer to start fresh with her own. But then I realized it did not really matter. The ornaments themselves were not the point. They were just physical objects, representations of something deeper, something that could not be contained in glass or paper or any material form. What mattered was the love they represented, the memories they held, the connections they symbolized. And those things would continue regardless of what happened to the physical objects, because they lived in us, in our hearts and minds, in the stories we told and the traditions we kept. The realization brought a sense of freedom, of lightness, of letting go. I did not need to control what happened after I was gone, did not need to worry about whether future generations would understand or appreciate or maintain everything exactly as I had. I just needed to do my part, to love fully and pass on what I could, and trust that the rest would take care of itself. The tradition would evolve, as traditions always do, adapting to new circumstances and new people while maintaining its essential core. And that was not just okay. It was exactly as it should be. I finished my tea and turned off the Christmas tree lights, then made my way upstairs to bed. It had been a long day, a good day, a day full of love and connection and meaning. And as I lay in the darkness, I felt that familiar sense of gratitude wash over me, gratitude for this life, this family, this moment. I had been given so much, more than I could ever fully acknowledge or repay. And the best way to honor those gifts was to receive them fully, to appreciate them deeply, and to pass them on generously. Sleep came easily that night, and my dreams were peaceful, full of light and warmth in the faces of everyone I loved. And when I woke the next morning, I felt rested and renewed, ready to face whatever the new day would bring. The Christmas season would wind down soon. The decorations would come down. Life would return to its normal rhythms. But something had shifted, something fundamental and lasting, and I knew that I would carry the magic of this Christmas with me through all the ordinary days to come. The weeks and months that followed were unremarkable in the best possible way. I fell back into my routines, my work and my hobbies and my social obligations. I saw Emma and Grace regularly, sometimes for planned visits and sometimes for spontaneous drop-ins. We had dinners together and went to movies and just spent time in each other's company, building the everyday memories at the foundation of family life. But even in the midst of the ordinary, I found myself more present, more aware, more appreciative of the small moments that make up a life. I noticed things I might have overlooked before, the way the light fell through the kitchen window in the afternoon, the sound of Grace's laughter, the feeling of Emma's hand in mine. I paid attention to the sensory details of my life, the taste of my morning coffee, the smell of rain on pavement, the texture of my favorite sweater. And in paying attention, I found a richness and depth that had always been there, but that I had not always noticed. I thought often about the tradition, about what it had taught me, about how it had changed my understanding of my life and my place in the world. And I realized that the real magic was not in the specific ritual of standing at a window on Christmas Eve, though that was meaningful and important. The real magic was in the awareness it cultivated, the openness it encouraged, the sense of connection it fostered. And that awareness, that openness, that sense of connection, they could be practiced every day, in every moment, not just on special occasions. So I began to create small rituals for myself, moments throughout the day when I would pause and be present and feel grateful. In the morning, before I got out of bed, I would lie still for a few minutes and think about the day ahead, setting an intention to be open and aware. At meals, I would take a moment before eating to appreciate the food, to think about all the people and processes that had brought it to my table. In the evening, before sleep, I would review the day, not judging or analyzing, but simply acknowledging what had happened, what I had felt, what I had learned. These small practices transformed my experience of daily life, making even the most mundane activities feel meaningful and connected to something larger. I was not just going through the motions anymore, not just checking items off a to-do list. I was living, really living, paying attention to my life as it unfolded, appreciating the gift of each moment, each breath, each heartbeat. And as I practiced this way of being, I noticed that it affected my relationships as well. I was more patient with Emma, more present with Grace, more engaged with friends and neighbors. I listened more deeply, spoke more thoughtfully, acted more intentionally. I was not perfect, not by any means, but I was more conscious, more aware, more committed to showing up fully in my life and in my relationships. Emma noticed a change in me, commented on it one day when we were having coffee together. She said I seemed more peaceful, more content, more at ease with myself and the world. I tried to explain what I had been learning about presence and awareness and the way the Christmas tradition had opened me to a different way of being. And she understood because she had experienced the same thing, had felt the same shift in perspective that comes from connecting to something larger than yourself. We talked for a long time that day, about life and meaning and the ways we try to make sense of our existence. We talked about Gran and the tradition she had passed down, about how it had shaped both of us, about how we hoped it would shape Grace. And we talked about the future, about our hopes and fears, about the world we were leaving for the next generation, about our responsibility to pass on not just traditions but values, not just memories but wisdom. It was one of those conversations that feels significant even as it is happening, one of those moments when you know you are touching something real and important and true. And when we finally parted, hugging each other tight before going our separate ways, I felt a deep sense of connection and gratitude, grateful for this daughter who had become not just my child but my friend, my companion on this journey, my partner in keeping alive the things that matter most. The seasons turned, as seasons do, and another year passed. And then another. Grace grew from a child into a young woman, smart and kind and full of potential. Emma navigated the challenges of parenting a teenager with grace and humor, and I watched from the sidelines, offering support when asked, but mostly just being present, being available, being a steady presence in their lives. The tradition continued, year after year, each Christmas Eve bringing us back to that window, to that moment of connection and remembrance. And each year, the tradition deepened, took on new layers of meaning, as Grace grew old enough to understand more, to ask deeper questions, to add her own insights and interpretations. She was a thoughtful child, curious about the world and her place in it, and the tradition gave her a framework for understanding her connection to the past and her responsibility to the future. She took it seriously, this inheritance she had been given, and I could see her beginning to think about how she would pass it on someday, how she would adapt it and make it her own while still honoring its essential core. Time moved forward, as it always does, bringing changes and challenges and joys. I grew older, my body slowing down, my energy waning, but my spirit remained strong, nourished by love and connection, and the sense of being part of something larger than myself. I knew my time was limited, that the years ahead were fewer than the years behind, but I did not fear it. I had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich in love and meaning and connection, and I knew that when I was gone, I would continue to exist in the memories and traditions and love of those who came after me. One winter evening, several years after Grace had first joined us in tradition, I found myself at the kitchen window alone, looking out at a world transformed by snow. It was not Christmas Eve, just an ordinary Tuesday in January, but the quality of the light and stillness of the air reminded me of that first Christmas Eve when a memory had returned to me, when I had stood in this exact spot and suddenly remembered Gran and that moment we had shared when I was 9. And standing there, I felt the full circle of it all, the way everything had come around, the way the past and present and future were all connected in this continuous loop of love and memory and tradition. I had been the child receiving the gift, and then the mother passing it on, and now the grandmother watching it take root in the next generation. And someday, not too far in the future, I would be the ancestor, the one remembered and honored, the one whose presence was felt even in absence. The thought did not make me sad. Instead, it filled me with a sense of completion, of satisfaction, of having done what I was meant to do. I had received love and given love. I had been shaped by those who came before and had shaped those who came after. I had kept the traditions alive and passed them on, and that was enough. That was everything. I stood at the window for a long time, not thinking about anything in particular, just being present, just feeling grateful, just appreciating this moment and this life and this beautiful, complicated, miraculous experience of being human. And when I finally turned away and went about the rest of my evening, I carried that feeling with me, that sense of peace and connection and belonging. The years continue to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, its own challenges and triumphs. I watched Grace graduate from high school and go off to college, just as I had watched Emma do years before. I celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays. I experienced loss and grief when friends pass away, and joy and wonder when new babies were born into the extended family. I lived fully and completely, savoring each moment, each experience, each connection. And through it all, the tradition remained, a constant in a changing world, an anchor in stormy seas, a reminder of what mattered most. Every Christmas Eve, no matter what else was happening, no matter where we all were or what challenges we were facing, we would find our way to a window, would stand in the darkness and open ourselves to the presence of all those who had loved us and all those we had loved. And in that moment, everything else would fall away, and we would be connected, truly connected, to each other and to something larger than ourselves. As I grew older and my health began to decline, I found myself thinking more and more about legacy, about what I would leave behind, about how I would be remembered. And I realized that the things I had worried about for so much of my life, the achievements and accomplishments and material possessions, they did not matter nearly as much as I thought they did. What mattered was the love I had given and received, the connections I had nurtured, the traditions I had kept and passed on. I wanted to be remembered not for what I had done, but for how I had loved, not for what I had achieved, but for how I had shown up, not for what I had accumulated, but for what I had given away. And I wanted Emma and Grace to know, really know, how much it meant to me, how much joy they had brought to my life, how grateful I was to have been their mother and grandmother. So I began to write letters, one for Emma and one for Grace, trying to put into words what I felt, what I had learned, what I hoped for them. I wrote about the tradition and what it had meant to me, about Gran and the gift she had given me, about the importance of staying connected to the past, while also being open to the future. I wrote about love and loss, and the way grief is just love with nowhere to go. I wrote about the small moments that make up a life, about paying attention, and being present and finding magic in the ordinary. The letters took me weeks to write, as I kept adding things and revising things and trying to get the words just right. But finally they were done, and I sealed them in envelopes and put them away in a safe place, with instructions that they should be given to Emma and Grace after I was gone. And having written them, I felt a sense of peace, of having said what needed to be said, of having left behind something of value beyond just material possessions. One Christmas Eve, when Grace was home from college for the holidays, the three of us stood at the window together as we had done so many times before. But this time felt different, more poignant, more precious, because I knew in my bones that my time was running short, that this might be one of the last times we would do this together. I did not say anything about it, did not want to burden them with my awareness of mortality, but I held their hand a little tighter, paid attention a little more carefully, tried to memorize every detail of the moment. And as we stood there in the darkness, looking out at the snow falling softly, I felt the presence of everyone who had ever stood in this spot, everyone who had practiced this tradition, everyone who had loved and been loved. Gran was there, and her mother, and her grandmother, and all the others stretching back through time. And Emma was there, and Grace, and all the future generations stretching forward into time. And I was there in the middle, connecting them all, a link in the chain, a keeper of the tradition, a vessel for love. The feeling was overwhelming, almost too much to bear, and I felt tears streaming down my face, though I was not sad, not really. I was grateful, so deeply grateful for this life, this family, this moment, grateful for the love I had received and the love I had given, grateful for the traditions that had shaped me and that I had passed on, grateful for every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. Emma noticed my tears and squeezed my hand, asking if I was okay. I nodded and smiled and told her I was more than okay. I was perfect. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing, with exactly the people I was supposed to be with. And she smiled back, understanding without needing more explanation, and Grace leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stood there together in the darkness, 3 generations connected by love and tradition and the invisible threads that bind us all together. When we finally turned the light back on and returned to the ordinary world, I felt different, changed in some fundamental way. I had let go of something, some last bit of fear or resistance or holding on. I was ready, truly ready, for whatever came next, knowing that I had done what I was meant to do, that I had loved fully and been loved in return, that I had passed on the gifts I had received. The months that followed were peaceful, quiet, full of small joys and simple pleasures. I spent time with Emma and Grace, with friends and neighbors, with the people who mattered most. I read books I had been meaning to read, listened to music I loved, sat in my garden, and watched the seasons change. I was not waiting to die, but I was also not afraid of it, accepting it as the natural conclusion to a life well lived. And then one night in early spring, as I lay in bed listening to the rain on the roof, I felt a shift, a loosening, a sense of something opening. I was not in pain, not afraid, just aware that my time had come, that I was ready to let go, to move on to whatever came next. I thought about Emma and Grace, about how much I loved them, about how grateful I was for the time we had shared. I thought about Gran, about seeing her again, about being reunited with all those who had gone before. And I thought about the tradition, about how it would continue without me, about how Emma and Grace would stand at that window on future Christmas Eves and feel my presence along with all the others, about how I would become part of the chain, part of the continuity, part of the love that transcends time and space, and even death. The thought brought me comfort and peace, and I let myself drift, let myself float, let myself move toward whatever was waiting for me on the other side. My last thought was of that kitchen window, of standing there in the darkness with Gran's hand in mine, feeling the presence of all those who had loved me and all those I had loved. And I understood, finally and completely, what she had been trying to teach me all those years ago, that love does not end, that we are all connected, that the people who shape us never really leave us, that we carry them with us always, in our hearts and our memories and the traditions we keep, and that when we pass on those traditions, when we share that love, when we open ourselves to connection, we become part of something eternal, something that will continue long after our physical bodies have returned to dust. And with that understanding, with that sense of peace and completion and profound gratitude, I let go. I release my hold on this life, this body, this particular expression of consciousness, and I moved into whatever came next, trusting that it would be okay, that I would be okay, that the love I had given and received would continue, would ripple out through time and space, would touch lives I would never know, would become part of the great web of connection that binds us all together.